LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 28th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the 13 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be really informative, educational, media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. My main topic, the main focus of a lot of the Sunday morning news analysis shows was a kind of ad-lib line, I guess, at the end of a speech that President Joe Biden gave in Warsaw on Saturday, in which he said something, I think it was like, "For God's sake, this guy cannot remain in power," referring to Vladimir Putin. And of course, regime change has never been the policy of, or at least the express policy of the United States when it comes to Vladimir Putin, so that made a lot of news. And I will be covering that, and I will be showing you 7 minutes of Joe Biden answering questions about that at his press conference earlier today. In fact, I'll show that first, but as usual, I do like to start with a little bit of political comedy, and the political comedy I want to start with is on last week's main topic, which is the Supreme Court hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson, and that was quite a show that I watched the entire thing, and I unfortunately I didn't have time to do a special live stream about that, but I will talk about it a little more, especially at the end when I get to a clip I have of Adam Kinzinger, my final newsmaker clip, responding to another Supreme Court news story from the last week. The wife of Justice Clarence Thomas, very conservative justice, his wife Ginny Thomas is a conservative activist who did all these text messages to then Chief of Staff for Donald Trump, Mark Meadows, with all these weird conspiracy theories about the election being stolen and, you know, the Biden team being rounded up and put on barges outside of Guantanamo to be tried for sedition and et cetera, et cetera. And so that when I get to that topic at the end, I'll talk a little more about the Supreme Court hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson. But one thing that I've always noticed, I haven't used a lot of political comedy clips from Bill Maher, because a lot of times I don't really find him that funny anymore, and also he seems to, ever since COVID started, he doesn't do the show live anymore, and for a while I think he was doing it like a day early, although I think he's only doing it a few hours early now, but it always seems like he's kind of behind, and that's, I put a link to the full monologue available on YouTube and down in the video description if you want to watch the whole thing, but he did make one joke that I thought was funny, about Republicans' obsession with the old Brett Kavanaugh hearings. But that was actually my topic last week. I talked extensively about how Brett Kavanaugh lied his way onto the court, and the Republicans stopped the FBI background check so that a lot of people were never interviewed, including his freshman college roommate Jim Roche and someone else from his freshman class, Deborah Ramirez, who says that he sexually assaulted her at a party in Lawrence Hall in 1983. And anyway, you can go back and watch that because I have special insight into all of that because I lived in Lawrence Hall in 1983 at Yale. I was in Brett Kavanaugh's freshman class. So anyway, that was last week's topic though, but Bill Maher, a week behind, but with a funny joke I thought I would play for you over here.
I mean, I think the Republicans were still mad about Brett Kavanaugh from 2018. I mean, if you took a drink every time they mentioned Brett Kavanaugh, you'd be Brett Kavanaugh. No.
I like that. And last week I did show multiple clips of Republicans bringing up the Kavanaugh hearings when it came to Ketanji Brown Jackson, and they brought it up multiple times during her confirmation hearings this week. And the next clip I want to show you is one of these weird things that's going on Fox News, where they're thinking, I guess the Republicans are playing to their base, and Fox News is like the news channel that is also for that same Republican base. So I guess it makes sense that they take seriously some of the questions that Ketanji Brown Jackson would ask. One, Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee asked her to define what a woman is, which actually is not all that easy, and it created this whole firestorm throughout the week. And but my second political comedy clip here is going to be Karl Rove settling the question, because of course he's, according to the rest of the people on Fox News, he's like an expert on what is a woman over in this clip.
She could have taken care of a lot of this if she had better answers to some of the simple questions. What is a woman? A woman is somebody with 2 X chromosomes, and that would have ended the discussion. And instead, we had a little bit of back and forth on it. But she's going to be confirmed. She's going to be reliably liberal. She's replacing a reliably liberal judge. And the question is she going to be the occasional person like Breyer was, who breaks from liberal orthodoxy?
Maria and I had that very conversation in the makeup room earlier.
Who is a woman?
Yeah.
Thankfully, Karl has told us this morning.
Yeah, right. Well,
I'm so glad about that.
If anybody knows, it's Karl.
Absolutely.
Are there legitimate concerns, though, Maria, about some of her positions?
I guess there was no one there to correct Karl Rove, but 2 X chromosomes is not a good definition of a woman, even if you're only talking about biological sex, because phenotype is not necessarily determined by genotype, if you know anything about genetics. And especially, I mean, for example, look up or do a Google search for androgen insensitivity syndrome. This is a condition that affects some people where they have an X and a Y chromosome, so they're supposedly a man, a boy, or whatever, but their body doesn't process testosterone, and they generally develop more into having more female bodies than male bodies, although they can't have children. They don't develop the ability to have children, but a lot of people with androgen insensitivity syndrome, sometimes called testicular feminization, live their lives as women even though they have an X and a Y chromosome. And that doesn't even get into the whole politics of transgender, people who are being are born one biological sex but feel that they identify as the other gender or no gender. But it's all just a lot more complicated than Karl Rove made it seem there. And then I saw a whole bunch of people talking about how, well, how can you say there are all these women? How can you say that Ketanji Brown Jackson is the first black woman nominated to the Supreme Court if you can't define what a woman is? And my answer to that is, well, can you say that you've eaten a lot of sandwiches, even if you can't define what a sandwich is? There's that whole controversy about whether a hot dog is a sandwich. In fact, I think that's kind of the same. It's not even an analogy. That's kind of the same controversy here, like whether having a hot dog still qualifies in the definition or no. Whether a hot dog is a sandwich, well, whatever. You know what I'm saying. I'm just saying that definitions can be difficult, and Fox News, just in a supposed straight news program, not only had Karl Rove give that opinion, but nobody tried to correct him, even though apparently Jon Roberts and Marie Harf had been discussing it in the makeup room. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that comic lack of understanding from the people at Fox News. And anyway, so I'm going to move on now to the main topic. Before, like I said, at the end, I'm going to talk a little more about the Supreme Court when I showed the Adam Kinzinger clip talking about Ginny Thomas's text to Mark Meadows. But before I get to that, and before I get to the news summaries that I usually do after political commentary, I'm going to start by sort of showing you the ending of this news story. And, I do that for the same reason I pre-criticize the clips a lot, so that you can take my analysis while you're watching the primary source material yourself, and then you can decide if I was right while you're watching it. Otherwise, if I give you my criticism and then you might have to go back and rewatch, well, I don't know, maybe you go back and rewatch it anyway. But the point being that sometimes it's easier to understand the news stories from yesterday if you see how it ended up today. And, in fact, when I took AP U.S. History in high school, I remember our AP U.S. History teacher taught history backwards for kind of that reason, because if you start with the president and move backwards, you can kind of understand the causes. And so basically, like I said at the beginning of the live stream, Biden in Warsaw ad-libbed this line at the end of this really strong, Gorbachev tear down this wall type speech that he made in Warsaw to Putin about how evil he was and how democracy is going to triumph over autocracy, and the people of Ukraine will win this fight and all that. And then at the very end, he throws in the, for God's sake, this guy cannot remain in power. And that got him a lot of blowback. First, some of people in his administration kind of walked it back. In fact, later I'll show you the U.S. ambassador to NATO kind of walking it back. He didn't mean he has to be out of power. He meant he shouldn't be empowered to make war on Ukraine, which is kind of weak. And anyway, and then Fox News was really beating him over the head with it. This is a Fox News Chyron from this morning, from the Faulkner focus. Biden's epic blunder overshadows Warsaw speech. And so he wasn't getting the bang out of the speech that he wanted, and then the walking back made him look weak. And so when he had a press conference on his budget this morning, or I guess this afternoon, he took several questions. I sort of edited together the beginning of the questions he took and the end that cover this topic, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that 7+ minutes from Biden's press conference today over here.
O'Donnell, NBC.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do you believe what you said? Thank you, sir. Do you believe what you said, that Putin can't remain in power? Or do you now regret saying that because your government has been trying to walk that back? Did your words complicate matters?
Well, you asked 3 different questions. I'll answer them all. Number 1, I'm not walking anything back. The fact of the matter is I was expressing the moral outrage I felt toward the way Putin is dealing and the actions of this man. Just brutality. Half the children in Ukraine. I just come from being with those families. And so, but I want to make it clear, I wasn't then, nor am I now, articulating a policy change. I was expressing the moral outrage that I feel, and I make no apologies for it.
Personal feelings, sir. Your personal feelings?
My personal feelings. Secondly, you asked me about, well, what was the second part?
Does it complicate the diplomacy of this moment?
No, I don't think it does. You know, the fact is that we're in a situation where what complicates the situation at the moment is the escalatory efforts of Putin to continue to engage in carnage, the kind of behavior that makes the whole world say, my God, what is this man doing? That's what complicates things a great deal. And but I don't think it complicates it at all.
Mr. President,
Let me go to Steve Holland, Reuters.
Mr. President, thank you. When you say that you're not walking anything back, you do feel that Vladimir Putin should be removed from power? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I was expressing just what I said. I was expressing the moral outrage I felt towards this man. I wasn't articulating a policy change. And I think that, you know, he continues on this course that he's on. He is going to become a pariah worldwide, and who knows what he becomes at home in terms of support.
Just to follow up, are you concerned this remark might escalate the conflict?
No, I'm not. I'm not at all. Look,
thank you.
And you know, look, the other thing is that a couple people have asked me as well. Might as well speak to it unless you want to ask the question. But you know, that other governments have suggested that this is a problem. I'm escalating things. No. And has it weakened NATO? No, it hadn't. NATO has never, ever, 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 ever been as strong as it is today. Never.
so if saying he cannot remain in power does not mean regime change, what does it mean in your opinion?
It means that I would hope it was expressing my outrage. He shouldn't remain in power. Just like, bad people shouldn't continue to do bad things. But it doesn't mean we have a fundamental policy to do anything to take Putin down in any way.
What made you add that? Because that wasn't in your prepared remarks, we were told. So what made you add that at the end, Mr. President? Because
I was talking to the Russian people. The last part of the speech was talking to the Russian people, telling them what we thought. And I was communicating this to not only the Russian people, but the whole world. This is just stating a simple fact that this kind of behavior is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. And the way to deal with it is to strengthen and keep NATO completely united and help Ukraine where we can.
We need some more clarification, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I know you're going to ask a really nice question.
Well, it's an important question, I think. Are you worried that other leaders in the world are going to start to doubt that America is back if some of these big things that you say on the world stage keep getting walked back?
What's getting walked back?
It made it sound like, just in the last couple days, it sounded like you told U.S. troops they were going to Ukraine. It sounded like you said it was possible the U.S. would use a chemical weapon, and it sounded like you were calling for regime change in Russia, and we know
none of the three occurred.
None of the three occurred?
None of the three.
Mr. President?
You interpret the language that way. I was talking to the troops. We're talking about helping train the troops that are the Ukrainian troops that are in Poland. That's what the context. I sat there with those guys for a couple hours. That's what we talked about.
So when you said you're going to see when you're there, you were not intending to
I was referring to meeting with and talking with the Ukrainian troops who were in Poland.
And when you said a chemical weapon use by Russia would trigger a response in kind?
It will trigger a significant response.
What does that mean?
I'm not going to tell you. Why would I tell you? You got to be silly.
The world wants to know.
The world wants to know a lot of things. I'm not telling them what the response would be. Then Russia knows the response.
Mr. President.
All right, I'm going to take two more questions. 1, 2.
Mr. President, thank you.
I still want to get back to your original words that he cannot remain in power. Can you help us understand, you have more foreign policy experience than any president who has ever held this office. Whether those are your personal feelings or your feelings as president, do you understand why people would believe you, as someone commanding one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, saying someone cannot remain in power is a statement of U.S. policy? And also, are you concerned about propaganda use of those remarks by the Russians?
No and no.
Tell me why. You have so much experience. You are the leader of this country.
Because it's ridiculous. Nobody believes we're going to take down. I was talking about taking down Putin. Nobody believes that. Number one. Number two, what have I been talking about since this all began? The only war that's worse than one intended is one that's unintended. The last thing I want to do is engage in a land war or a nuclear war with Russia. That's not part of it. I was expressing my outrage at the behavior of this man. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. And it's more an aspiration than anything. He shouldn't be in power. There's no, I mean, people like this shouldn't be ruling countries, but they do. The fact they do, but doesn't mean I can't express my outrage about it. Last question.
President, thank you. You've said that you're confident that your comment won't undermine diplomatic efforts. But just to be clear, are you confident that Vladimir Putin sees it that way, that he will not use this as an escalatory?
I don't care what he thinks. Look, here's the deal. He's going to do what he's going to do. Putin, look.
But you're not concerned that he may see your language and view that as a sign of a reason for escalation, use that as an excuse to escalate, given his recent behavior?
Given his recent behavior, you should, excuse me, I shouldn't say that to you. Given his recent behavior, people should understand that he is going to do what he thinks he should do, period. He's not affected by anybody else, including, unfortunately, apparently his own advisors. This is a guy who goes to the beat of his own drummer. And the idea that he is going to do something outrageous because I called him for what he was and what he's doing, I think is just not rational.
So there you can see, I think President Biden did a pretty good job on walking back the walk back to trying to stop this news cycle where he's being you're about to see the whole news cycle. I'm going to show you all 5 of the news summaries, which all say that he, went too far, and now they're walking it back, and had to clean up his statement about regime change. I mean, he's actually said a lot of stuff. Well, you heard Peter Doocy gives the Fox News talking points I keep hearing over and over again. There's one other one about whether sanctions are a deterrent. I'll be showing a clip from Fox News Sunday about that coming up, but about how he made it sound like American troops were going into Ukraine in one speech that he gave, and you saw Joe Biden clean that up a little bit, and about whether we were going to respond to the use of chemical weapons in kind, which on Fox News they're saying means with chemical weapons, and he said that's not true. And then this whole thing about Putin cannot remain in power, but he was just expressing his moral outrage, not the need for regime change. I mean, I think Biden has always had this this penchant for making gaffes. I even made a video about it, like in 2008, where he was asked about it in the presidential debates when he was running for president in 2008, and he was asked, like, will you be able to, like, stop your all your gaffes and be able to, like, show discipline and not make gaffes? And then Biden just said yes and stopped at that. That was like his like big line in that debate, really. I think I showed that video a while back, but partly to make the point that for people who think that Biden is suffering from dementia, when I see that a lot online, or that he's too old and feeble and senile or whatever, and they point to these gaffes that he makes as if it's something new, but it's something that's been going on his entire career. So maybe, I mean, Biden is pretty old, though you don't want to be ageist, and if you watch his performance in that press conference there, I mean, that was pretty good. That was not the performance of someone who was senile or demented, at least. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section, but I wanted to now show you the 5 news summaries from the big 5 corporate outlets, and I'm going to start with I think it actually is the best, and it is the longest one this week. It's from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Co-host Jon Karl was hosting this week and talked to Terry Moran, I think in Lviv, if I'm remembering correctly, in western Ukraine. No one was reporting. Well, someone on CBS News Face the Nation was reporting from Kyiv this week, but nobody started with a reporter in Kyiv for some reason. I don't know if that's because Biden was over across the border in Poland, very close to Lviv, or I'm not sure why that is, but that's something I've been keeping tabs on every week since the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, like how, especially because I'm only showing the first reporter. It would be way too long if I showed like every reporter they go to, although most of them actually only had one reporter, including ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Jon Karl, Terry Moran, actually with a pre-recorded video package that he narrates. I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that news summary from yesterday, which again focuses pretty heavily on Biden's gaffe he had to take back, that now he's taken back even more, as you know the outcome. Do you think he fixed it in today's press conference? Well, you'll see more about the mistake he made, if it even was a mistake, over in this clip.
And welcome to This Week. It was Joe Biden's most consequential trip as president yet. Back-to-back summit meetings in Brussels with the European Union, the G7, and NATO, all designed to unify our most powerful allies against Vladimir Putin's unprovoked assault on Ukraine. The president also traveled to NATO's eastern border in Poland, where he met with some of the 100,000 American troops now stationed in Europe. That's the largest U.S. military presence in Europe in 20 years. In a stark reminder of the peril of this moment, while President Biden was still in Poland, Russian missiles struck western Ukraine, bringing destruction and massive clouds of black smoke less than 50 miles from NATO's border. Hours later, Biden delivered an address that invoked the weight of history, putting the fight against Putin's aggression in broader terms, declaring the battle between democracy and autocracy as the test of all time. Biden also issued a blunt warning to Vladimir Putin that any attack on NATO territory would be met with the full force of the alliance's collective power. And he denounced Russia's leader with what seemed to be a call for him to be ousted from power.
A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never erase a people's love for liberty. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House quickly clarified, issuing a statement that despite what he said, President Biden is not actually calling for regime change in Moscow. Our senior national correspondent, Terry Moran, was with the president for part of his trip. He starts us off from Lviv. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning, John. This city has taken in hundreds of thousands of people who fled their homes elsewhere in Ukraine, and you can see it and feel it here. The streets are thronged with people, traffic at a standstill in many places. But those missile attacks here yesterday, one just about a mile north to us, the other a mile south to us over here, they're the fiercest attacks yet. The mayor of Lviv calling them, quote, greetings from the Russian aggressor to President Biden, who is across the border in Poland.
At Warsaw Castle in Poland, President Biden declared that today's war in Ukraine is
a battle between democracy and autocracy, between liberty and repression, between a rules-based order and one governed by brute force.
The president summoning free nations to a new cause, a new and dangerous 21st century struggle.
History shows this is the task of our time. The task of this generation.
After more than a month, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is stalling on many fronts, and in some places, it's in reverse. So now, in what may be a major change in strategy, Russia says its main goal is simply to take control of the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine. That's a far cry from Vladimir Putin's vow to demilitarize and denazify all of Ukraine, which sounded a lot like regime change. But Putin's forces have proved badly led, poorly trained, and inadequately supplied. Determined Ukrainian forces have gone on the counterattack. Russian troops once threatening the capital of Kyiv have been pushed back more than 30 miles and are now digging in, according to U.S. defense officials. So now Russia has turned to long-range, indiscriminate, and merciless bombardments of urban centers. Kyiv is being hit almost daily by artillery and missile strikes, residential areas mainly taking the brunt of the attacks, the deadliest so far coming this week. Video verified by ABC shows the moment a missile hit a shopping mall on the edge of Kyiv. Russia claims the site was being used by Ukrainian forces to launch missiles. Today, more and more of this ancient European capital looks like this. But Russia's main effort now is in the east and south, in Donbass, Kharkiv, and above all, in Mariupol. As the fighting rages there, Russia is inching closer to capturing the key port city. Several missile strikes targeting the city of Lviv, where so many refugees have fled, joined by most nations' diplomats. In Brussels this week, a show of unity and determination by the Western allies, and a sense that suddenly everything has changed in Europe.
So it's a pivotal moment in history.
I asked NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg about growing concerns that Russia might use chemical weapons.
Any use of chemical weapons will be totally unacceptable, will be a blatant violation of international law, and will fundamentally change the nature of the conflict.
But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is urging NATO to do more, asking in an address to Ukrainians last night, what is NATO doing? Is it being run by Russia? What are they waiting for? It's been 31 days. We are only asking for 1% of what NATO has, nothing more. Near the Polish border, President Biden mingled with Ukrainian refugees, listened to their stories. He's promised over $1 billion in humanitarian aid for the crisis and opened the doors of America to 100,000 Ukrainians. But that resettlement process can take years. And the war might still be grinding on. That was one of the president's main messages here. This crisis, which has changed so much so fast, is far from over.
That fight will be fought here by all Ukrainians because as the missile attacks in Lviv show, there is no real safe haven in Ukraine. And while Ukrainian forces have checked Russian advances mostly around the country, they are taking heavy losses too. And that's why President Zelensky keeps asking for more, because if this war grinds on, those forces will need more weapons, more help, a lot more. John?
Terry Moran in Lviv this morning. Thank you, Terry. Joining us now is Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister, a top advisor.
So yeah, you can see there that ABC, I think they had the longest, best, most detailed analysis of what's going on in Ukraine. This week, they decided only one reporter, and that's the choice. Most of the shows have gone back to just one reporter before they get to the newsmakers. Some of them even don't have any reporters. I thought that there was especially good analysis of what the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, said, that wanting just 1% of what NATO has, and the way that the Russian troops have kind of stalled, and this claim that they're now moving their focus to the east and sort of saying, oh, that's what we were going to do all along. But I don't know, I'm somewhat skeptical of that, especially given some of the military activity all around the country, the bombing in Lviv that you heard about there. This next report, I believe that Richard Engel, the reporter talking to Chuck Todd here, is they don't even say where he's from, just that he's from eastern Ukraine, but I guess that's for his security, but maybe somewhere in the Donbass region, or that's supposedly where the Russian focus is going to turn to, if that is even true. You'll see here Richard Engel does do a little bit of a translation of the Vladimir Zelensky speech and covers a lot of the same material, just with less time, fewer details, not pre-recorded video package like you saw from ABC. Here's the NBC News Meet the Press news summary. I will talk. Oh, and my other pre-criticism is they have this bias that all the media has, even if you count Fox News, but like if they have a new poll, that's big news, and they spend a lot of time on their bad news for Biden polling that I'll talk about with you some more after we watch the NBC News Meet the Press news summary together over here.
Good Sunday morning. The biggest news President Biden made yesterday was at the very end of an otherwise well-received speech. Just as he was wrapping things up in Warsaw, Mr. Biden made this startling statement about Vladimir Putin. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. Perhaps he said out loud what we've all been thinking. But a White House official tried to clarify that presidential ad-lib, saying the president's point was that Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over his neighbors or the region. He was not discussing Putin's power in Russia or regime change. Perhaps, but let's see how he receives it. We do have a new NBC News poll on Ukraine, the economy here at home, and President Biden, and a lot more. And let's start with Ukraine. By a fairly large 71 to 28% margin, Americans say they do not have a lot of confidence in President Biden's ability to respond to this war. 57% say we are already at war with Russia or will be within a year, a very pessimistic view. 34% disagree. What's more, 68% would prefer Mr. Biden make the economy his top priority, compared with just 29% who want him to focus on ending this war. Overall, President Biden's job approval stands at just 40%, with 55% disapproving. This is his worst showing yet in our poll since he became president. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have pushed back Russian troops, apparently forcing Russia, at least publicly, to claim that they're going to scale back their military goals and focus solely on the disputed territory in the east. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, is actually in eastern Ukraine now. And Richard, we know what the Russians say, right? But right after they say it, all of a sudden, missiles hit the west. What is really going on with the Russian military strategy?
Well, the Russian military strategy seems to be all over the place, and they've been having tremendous battlefield failures. And I think this claim by the Russian military command was a way to claim some success out of obvious failure, saying that their real focus is in the East. The East happens to be the only place where they've made some consolidated gains, particularly around the port city of Mariupol. So the one area that they are holding territory, they say that was their intention all along. But it is not clear at all that Vladimir Putin has given up on his overall war plan, which is to topple the government of Ukraine, to get rid of Zelensky. And I think that strike in Lviv showed that clearly. It may have also been a strike aimed at President Biden, a bit of an insult to say, we're going to strike right near the Polish border while you're in Poland, making some bold claims and making some insults at Vladimir Putin, calling him a butcher, among other things.
You know, Richard, I'm curious, how did the presidential ad lib that may go down in world history, how did that go over with President Zelensky?
Well, I don't think President Zelensky was overly impressed. President Zelensky spoke this morning and effectively accused Western leaders, he didn't mention President Biden by name, of being all talk. And I'll read you just a translation of his comments from a short while ago. He was talking about Mariupol, a city which is surrounded. It has been under attack, yet it is still not collapsed. And he said, I've spoken to the defenders of Mariupol. I'm in constant contact with them. Their determination, heroism, and firmness are astonishing. And then he went on to say, if only those who have been thinking for 31 days on how to hand over dozens of jets and tanks had 1% of their courage. So he's saying that meeting in NATO, which promised a lot of support, still isn't yielding the kind of results that Ukrainians want.
Richard Engel, who's in eastern Ukraine right now. Richard, thank you. And joining me now is Oksana Markarova. She's Ukraine's ambassador.
So, as you can see, Meet the Press also then went to a newsmaker, so also had just one reporter from the Ukrainian region, unlike previous weeks. Richard Engel from some unidentified spot in eastern Ukraine, I assume for his security. They're not saying exactly where he is. I also think the one thing that Richard Engel did better than Terry Moran maybe was to give more context, texture, whatever, to the claims being made by Russia that, our focus all along was just to take the eastern part of Ukraine, and both in terms of how that isn't really true. True in terms of what they're even doing now, and also how it's more about Russia's failures and Russia's mistakes, and if that's something Joe Biden did, all the media would be talking about how he walked back his previous claims about his goals in Ukraine. And I guess Richard Engel kind of did that, but compare that to and he also talked about how Biden called Putin a butcher, though they didn't talk about how the French president, Macron, was upset about that. I think that shows up in this Fox News Sunday news summary where they don't even go. They have a reporter in Lviv, but they don't go to him first. They go to Washington, D.C. first, because it's all about politics. It's all about... that was my ringtone. I almost put copyrighted music onto my live stream. That would have been bad. And it says scam likely. Well, anyway, sorry. What was I saying? Rich Edson talks all about the supposed mistakes that Biden made. I was talking about how Fox News went to Rich Edson in Washington, D.C. as their first reporter to talk about this, even though they have Mike Tobin in Lviv coming second. I don't know why they decided to go back to the most political person. And anyway, I think I've pre-criticized that there was something I was going to say before my phone rang. But anyway, maybe I'll remember it and talk about it. Maybe it has to do with I think they show Biden calling Putin a butcher in here, and they certainly talk about how he has to walk back his comments, and I think they even talk about some of those other things Peter Doocy brought up in the press conference clip I showed earlier. But anyway, I'll talk about all that a little more after we watch the Fox News Sunday news summary, even though we know Fox isn't really a news organization, together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The president is back on U.S. soil this morning after a blistering speech in Europe where he slammed Russian President Vladimir Putin and gave a stark warning to stay out of NATO territory. The president also appeared to call for Putin's removal, but the White House walking that back this morning. This comes after days of meetings with NATO allies on how to support Ukraine as Russia continues indiscriminate shelling 1 month into the invasion. In a moment, we'll discuss the president's speech with the U.S. ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith. We begin, though, with team coverage. Mike Tobin live on the ground in Lviv, Ukraine. But first, Rich Edson live from the White House with reaction to Biden's harsh words. Rich?
John, a trip designed to coordinate more punishment for Vladimir Putin and help for Ukraine, though the White House is left clarifying President Biden's major pronouncement.
It is Putin. It is Vladimir Putin who is to blame, period.
In a major speech in Poland, at the doorstep of Russian aggression, President Biden verbally tore down Vladimir Putin, assailing him for his invasion of Ukraine. The president defended and encouraged the world's democracies and warned the Russian autocrat against moving on their premier defensive alliance.
Don't even think about moving on 1 single inch of NATO territory.
The president's most powerful and lasting declaration in this address, that Putin cannot remain in power, needed a major clarification from an unnamed White House official. Quote, the president's point was that Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over his neighbors or the region. He was not discussing Putin's power in Russia or regime change. That follows confusion over the White House position on a response to potential chemical weapons use or the purpose of sanctions. The speech ended a busy 3 days in Europe. During this time, the White House announced additional natural gas shipments to Europe, though ending dependency on Russian oil and gas would take years. The Ukrainian government is pushing for more energy from around the world and more weapons from NATO.
All offers are on the table. Our needs are on the table. We need peace immediately. The answers are up to you.
Ahead of his speech, the president met with European leaders, U.S. troops reinforcing NATO's eastern flank, and Ukrainian refugees. Millions have dispersed into neighboring countries. The White House announced the U.S. will accept up to 100,000 refugees and pledged $1 billion in humanitarian aid. While meeting with refugees, the president also turned his attention to Vladimir Putin, calling him a butcher. The president warned this battle will not be won in days or months, and that we need to steel ourselves for the fight ahead. John?
Rich Edson at the White House for us this morning. Rich, thank you. Now let's turn to Mike Tobin. He is live in Lviv, Ukraine.
Why do they go to the White House before they go to the Ukraine? Before they go to their reporter in Ukraine? That doesn't make sense to me. I think it's because of just another sign. Fox News is really political. They didn't talk about the French president being upset about Biden calling Putin a butcher. Maybe that's in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary. I can't remember, but that's what I'll show next. But I think you did see a little more criticism of Biden in that news summary than in the others, even though there was criticism in all of them. But we can juxtapose it with the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, John Dickerson, and then their reporter, I believe in Lviv, who has an unusual name. His name is Imtiaz Tiab. I've shown him before, and he also is reporting on the same facts. Maybe he's the one who talks about the president of France getting upset with Biden calling Putin a butcher. I actually have sort of a joke about that, but I'm waiting for the news summary that says that, and I will talk about it a little more after we watch that CBS News Face the Nation news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. President Biden touched down early this morning from his trip through Europe, where he made the continued case to Western allies for assistance to Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. Nevertheless, this morning, Ukrainian President Zelensky accused the West of lacking courage, making yet another exasperated plea for more fighter jets and tanks. We want to begin in Lviv, Ukraine, where Russian rockets rained down yesterday, just a few hundred miles away from where President Biden was speaking in Poland. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab is there.
John, good morning. Well, here in Lviv's historic city center, and life really does seem to be returning back to normal. But life is anything but following those Russian strikes on a fuel depot just 2 miles from here. Now, almost immediately after the attack, we could see dark plumes of smoke rising into the sky, and later learned at least 5 people were injured. Now, Russia's defense ministry has confirmed it used long-range and cruise missiles in the assault, saying its target was a plant being used to repair anti-aircraft systems, radar stations, and tanks. Now, the missile strike comes less than a day after Russian generals said the Kremlin would be, quote, shifting focus from its ground offensive aimed at Kyiv to instead prioritizing what Moscow calls the liberation of the contested eastern Donbass region. And while it doesn't yet look as if Vladimir Putin is changing his approach to the war on Ukraine, what's clear are the Kremlin's military miscalculations as Ukrainian forces continue to fight back with an intensity few expected. Now, here in Lviv, which has seen 2 other strikes nearby in as many weeks, it's been something of a sanctuary for the millions of Ukrainians fleeing violence. And this Russian missile strike is causing serious concern that it could impact the humanitarian support that so many Ukrainians have received if Russia's attacks here in Lviv continue. John.
Imtiaz, thank you. CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Pata is in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv with this report.
And there you can see CBS News Face the Nation was the only one of the news programs who actually had someone in Kyiv. I don't know if it's because it's gotten more dangerous there after the Fox News reporter, what was his name, Benjamin Hall, he was injured, and his camera person and producer were both killed, and I don't know, maybe that's why, or maybe because they all moved west for Biden's trip to Poland, or anyway, and he didn't mention the butcher thing. Maybe it's in the CNN State of the Union news summary from Dana Bash. That's the shortest of the news summaries, where the State of the Union is also, they say, what is the State of the Union this week? And every week it's, Jake Tapper started this habit, of saying, what is the State of the Union every week? And this week it's focused on the main topic, which is, did Biden mean what he said? And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is wondering if President Biden meant what he said. You're watching a special 2-hour edition of State of the Union. The president is back in Washington this morning after a major trip to Europe to meet with allies. He delivered a speech yesterday in Poland, harshly condemning Russian President Vladimir Putin and describing the war as a battle between, quote, democracy and autocracy. But it's this ad-libbed line at the end of his speech that's raising eyebrows around the world.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
The White House quickly tried to walk that comment back, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this morning in Israel the U.S. does not have a strategy of regime change in Russia. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Russia struck the Ukrainian city of Lviv with at least 2 missiles, a city in the west that had been previously spared the worst of Russia's attacks, even as Russia said it would shift strategy to focus on the Donbass area in eastern Ukraine. With me now from Brussels, fresh off the NATO summit with President Biden, is the U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO, Ambassador Julianne Smith.
And I actually have a couple of clips of Ambassador Julianne Smith, the U.S. Ambassador to NATO, coming up. I guess, which one of them, maybe it was one of the earlier news summaries and I just missed it. Maybe it was the ABC one where they mentioned that the president of France was upset that Joe Biden called Putin a butcher because of, it was incendiary language or whatever. And I was thinking, the way that they supposedly walked back his claim that Putin cannot remain in power, I wouldn't have been surprised if the Biden team had come to walk back his comment that Putin was a butcher by saying, oh, no, Biden meant the kindly Sam the Butcher. You may remember from the old show, The Brady Bunch. No, that was my butcher joke that I promised earlier, but anyway, I don't know. Anyone remember Sam the Butcher on the Brady Bunch, or maybe just me? I don't know. Anyway, I want to get to the newsmaker clips, and this is mostly about cleaning up Biden's or different. First, the first clip is Biden's ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith, trying to clean up or walk back what Biden said about how Putin cannot remain in power. And this, you saw the same thing. Secretary of State Antony Blinken did the same thing in a speech in Jerusalem. He meant, Putin cannot be empowered to invade his neighbors. He didn't mean regime change. And you saw actually Biden gave a much more reasonable or more honest explanation of what he meant by that ad lib, which was, he was expressing his moral outrage, but he didn't mean to change U.S. policy to regime change in Russia. So I'll start off with Julianne Smith doing the walk back before Biden came out today and walked back the walk back, talking to Dana Bash on CNN yesterday over here.
Let's start with President Biden's comment yesterday that Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power. The White House said quickly that he was not discussing Putin's power in Russia or regime change. Was that comment a mistake?
Well, look, the president had spent the day visiting with Ukrainian refugees. He went to the National Stadium in Warsaw and literally met with hundreds of Ukrainians. He heard their heroic stories as they were fleeing Ukraine in the wake of Russia's brutal war in Ukraine. In the moment, I think that was a principled human reaction to the stories that he had heard that day. But no, as you've heard from Secretary Blinken and others, the U.S. does not have a policy of regime change in Russia. Full stop.
Having said what you said, listening to the president, he sounded pretty unambiguous. This man cannot remain in power. Are you concerned that by walking back the president's comments, you and other administration officials may be undermining him on the world stage at a really critical moment?
I think we all feel great about how the last couple of days have gone. It was important to get the president here to Europe. He had several important meetings in Brussels with NATO leaders, with the G7, with the European Union. It was important for him also to go to Poland. He visited a city very close to the border with Ukraine. He was able to join a meeting with both the Ukrainian foreign minister and the Ukrainian defense minister. And then he was able to sit down with President Duda and talk about what Poland is doing in this moment, literally taking millions of refugees into their country. So this week has been remarkable. It's been historic. I thought the speech was completely pitch perfect. And I think this will set us on a good course for continuing to support the allies, support Ukrainians, and apply pressure on Russia to get them to stop this war.
I want to move on, but because there is some murkiness out there. You said that the U.S. policy is not regime change, full stop. Does that mean the U.S. believes Putin should stay in power?
I think what it means is that we are not pursuing a policy of regime change, but I think the full administration, the president included, believes that we cannot empower Putin right now to wage war in Ukraine or pursue these acts of aggression.
So there you see like I said, the U.S. ambassador to NATO trying to clarify what Biden said. But honestly, I think Biden did it better, and it's better that Biden did it the way he did in the press conference clip I showed today. It made him seem stronger, and it kind of makes the point that from Dana Bash's question about how all this walking back of Biden's strong statement really undermines his authority, and it's better for him to come out and explain what he meant rather than people to give these he didn't mean not in power, he meant shouldn't be empowered, and that's kind of weak. And so anyway, despite that valiant effort by the U.S. ambassador to NATO, I think what Joe Biden did at the press conference earlier today was a lot better. This next questioning, this is the Fox News Sunday questioning of the U.S. ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith, and they asked the same question you just saw Dana Bash ask and pretty much got the same answer. But they also went after this Fox News talking point. You saw Rich Edson mention it about whether sanctions are a deterrent. You saw he mentioned the whole chemical weapon thing in the news summary that Peter Doocy also mentioned in the news summary. And I've heard this talking point on Fox News over and over again, and there's a reason I think it's really stupid. Even though you will see they use clips of Biden administration officials generically saying sanctions are supposed to be a deterrent, what they're not showing you is all the clips of the administration officials saying our intelligence says he's going to invade Ukraine. In fact, that was like the main. One week there was even this story I covered on my Monday media mix-up about how they said, oh, he's going to invade on Wednesday, and they had to like walk back. It's not going to be Wednesday, but they were like all along saying, as they were putting the sanctions packages together, they were also saying he's already decided and he's going to invade. So I don't know why that's what the U.S. ambassador to NATO should say in answer to the question. She doesn't quite say that, but anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that Fox News Sunday biased interview question over here.
There's a debate, Madam Ambassador, in the administration as to exactly what sanctions were designed to do. We were told in the run-up to this invasion that sanctions were meant to deter Putin from ever going into Ukraine. But on the weekend, the president said that no, sanctions were never meant to deter. Let's listen to what the president said and listen to what his lieutenant said in the run-up to the invasion.
Let's get something straight. You remember, if you covered me from the very beginning, I did not say that, in fact, the sanctions would deter him. Sanctions never deter.
The president believes that sanctions are intended to deter.
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence.
The purpose of the sanctions, in the first instance, is to try to deter Russia from going to war.
Sanctions are not an end to themselves. They serve a higher purpose. And that purpose is to deter and prevent.
We do see them as having a deterrent impact.
So, Madam Ambassador, can you clear this up for us? Were they meant to deter or were they not meant to deter?
So look, before Russia went into Ukraine, we took a number of steps to outline the consequences that Russia would be facing if they'd opted for a war inside Ukraine. We laid out a sanctions package. We made it clear that we were in daily contact with our European allies who put together a package. Now that Russia has gone into Ukraine, we've moved forward with those costs. They've been unprecedented. And if you look at any indicator for the Russian economy, whether you're looking at the value of the ruble or you're looking at their credit rating or you're looking at interest rates, those sanctions are having an impact right now on the Russian economy.
But again, were they meant to deter or not?
Well, look, before the war, obviously, we were laying out the consequences in pretty explicit detail with the hope that President Putin would take an alternative course. We were trying in that moment to sharpen his choice. We were also, at that moment, moving U.S. force posture into Eastern Europe, also to help sharpen his choice. Unfortunately, he opted for war, and now he's feeling the consequences.
One last quick question, if I could, in the just remaining time we have left here. Russia appears...
So, yeah, there you can see that question about whether sanctions are supposed to deter, and they had like the whole little video package there, which I think is biased because it leaves out the part where all those people said Putin's decided he's going to invade, where, you know, trying to give him an alternative course, I guess, like Julianne Smith said in her answer there, but I think it actually required a sharper answer that points out the other things that people were saying at the same time about how, I mean, that was one of the starkest things about the lead up to the Ukrainian invasion was the way the Biden administration kept saying, it's already decided, it's already going to happen, there's nothing we can do, but we're still trying to say, don't do it. That was basically, for if you've been watching the Monday Media Mix-Up for the last, month and a half, that's exactly what happened. So the next two clips are also on the same topic. I'm going to show you first a Republican and then a Democrat from the U.S. Senate reacting to this controversy about whether Biden really meant it when he said that Putin cannot remain in power. And you'll see Rob Portman, the Republican from Ohio, first take some shots at Biden and how he's not doing a good job, even though I think actually Biden has done a fairly good job on Ukraine, as I'll talk about a little more after we watch Chuck Todd asking Senator Rob Portman about the cannot remain in power controversy over in this clip.
Start with the president's remarks yesterday, an apparent ad lib. But it's a question I think I asked you on this. You know, can this end with Putin in power? And what did you make of the president's remarks?
Well, first, I think all of us believe the world would be a better place without Vladimir Putin. But second, that's not the official U.S. policy. And by saying that regime change is our strategy, effectively, it plays into the hands of the Russian propagandists and plays into the hands of Vladimir Putin. So it was a mistake, and the president recognized that, and the White House has walked it back. By the way, they had to walk back 3 other comments he made as well. But look, we're in a crisis. We're in a war situation, and so clarity is incredibly important, and we need to be sure that we are also clear with our NATO allies, because that's how we are stronger.
President Zelensky heard all of this week, and he just says for him it's still talk. And I understand that he's in the middle of this war. He's watching innocent people get attacked and die. He wants some planes. He wants this this ability to do a no-fly zone. Any movement in your head on this?
Well, I think President Zelensky is correct. I thought the president's speech was very strong, despite the ad lib at the end, the gaffe at the end. But it was a powerful speech that does not match the action. So there was a mismatch between the rhetoric and what we're actually doing. And that's the issue, and that's what President Zelensky was talking about. Because there are additional weapons that they're desperately needing that we are not yet providing, particularly any anti-air systems and more munitions for their own anti-air systems. But also they're asking for anti-tank systems. They're asking for more anti-ship systems, which is really important right now because some of these missiles are coming from the Black Sea. They've asked for help across the board that is not yet there, and that's what President Zelensky is talking about. So we need to do more. We need to do it more quickly. We did send some Soviet-era anti-aircraft systems, I'm told, recently, at least based on public reporting, or at least it's on its way. But there are other systems that are more powerful, the S-300 in particular, that we have not sent. And we have that because we had acquired it at one point to be able to test it against our planes and so on. We should send that. We should do everything we can do to facilitate these other countries that have these Warsaw Pact era, Soviet systems into Ukraine, because that's what they desperately need, Chuck. And that's what the president's been asking for. We should also send the MiG-29s to raise that issue again. It's been a few weeks now since the Secretary of State gave that a green light, and somehow that hasn't happened. And the Ukrainians insist that they need it, they want it, it would be helpful. I think we need to trust them on that.
You heard the ambassador. Does phosphorus, the use of...
So there you can see one of the more reasonable Senate Republicans giving the Republican talking points on how Biden's not doing enough, he's not strong enough, he's has to walk back his statements too much, and actually, as I was saying before I showed the clip, I think Biden has done a fairly good job of both supporting the Ukrainian resistance, but also navigating it in such a way that he is not risking escalation. The World War III or whatever that I was talking about a couple weeks ago, how to stop the Russian invasion of Ukraine without starting World War III. That's kind of Biden's job and the job of the NATO alliance, and he's done a good job bringing that together. And if there's one mistake, I guess U.S. intelligence made the same mistake that pretty much everybody did, thinking that the Russian invasion would be successful in a fairly short period of time. Everyone kind of overestimated the strength of the Russian forces and underestimated the resistance of the Ukrainians. But I think Biden's done a pretty good job of pivoting when it became clear that Russia wasn't going to immediately succeed, and is now even supporting, the possibility of a Ukrainian victory, or at least a lack of a Russian victory, which is, as far as the U.S. is concerned, just as good, although as far as, in terms of the Ukrainians, a a non-Russian victory that lasts a long time is not good news, and there's already a lot of brutality going on there. That's something I talked about weeks ago and is continuing to happen with the apparent targeting of civilians, which is a war crime, whoever is responsible for it. And anyway, I think that those Republican talking points about Biden weakness or whatever are not really an accurate portrayal of his leadership ability, at least on this one crisis. I think he's done a fairly good job. And the next clip is a Democrat from the Senate, Amy Klobuchar, doing sort of the opposite of Rob Portman. This is sort of the Democratic talking points in defense of Biden, also talking about the supposed gaffe at the end of his speech, the Putin cannot remain in power gaffe, over in this clip.
I want to ask you about President Biden's speech and that line that we all heard him say very bluntly: this man, Vladimir Putin, cannot remain in power. I mean, wasn't he saying exactly what he believed?
First, the White House has clarified that he was talking about the region and that he was talking about that Vladimir Putin has got to stay out of NATO countries, something he specifically said in his speech. But I think what General Petraeus said was meaningful here. We know the policy of our country. We know what it is. I think Vladimir Putin knows what it is, and certainly our NATO allies and Americans know what it is. We're part of NATO. We're doing all we can to protect those NATO countries, doubling the number of troops in Poland that I just visited a few weeks ago. Incredible command there, incredible leadership, giving them significant military assistance that is so necessary, and we have done a lot, and we should do more. But beyond that, our policy is clear. NATO is a defensive alliance. The president has said it himself. And we will do all we can to help Ukraine. And you can see the strength of that help coming through with the fact that they've literally pushed Russian troops back from Kyiv.
And that message came through. But as you know, during the campaign, I mean, you ran against Joe Biden. You know full well what he said. He said, the words of a president matter. And that was the headline around the world. That was the message heard in Moscow. That's what the Russians are responding to. And whatever walkback there is, his words cannot remain in power.
Having stood there myself on that border and embraced those kids, the refugees coming in, hearing about the horror, they leave there with nothing on their leaving everything they have behind, everything, their little stuffed animals in their backpacks, moms with suitcases leaving their husbands behind to fight. Yes, the moment is clear. Vladimir Putin is a monster, but the position of the United States government is not to send troops in there. It is to give all the aid we can to Ukraine, which includes Switchblade drones, incredible drones that have done a lot of damage to the Russian army. And you've got to the Russian planes. You have got Stingers, 800 more Stingers, thousands of more Javelins, and we're doing more and more and more, and we must. I have personally advocated for doing more. That's what this is, and it's the humanitarian aid, over $1 billion pledge, taking in 100,000 refugees. That is what we are doing.
And it's not regime change in Moscow. Okay,
that has been made very clear.
Okay, let's turn to matters related to the High Court. You saw
and there you see Amy Klobuchar, I think, do a better job of defending the Biden administration's policies on the invasion of Ukraine than Rob Portman did criticizing them. But you can let me know what you think in the comment section as to which one you think did a better job. Then Jon Karl moves on to ask about the Supreme Court, first about these weird text messages that the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, Ginny Thomas, sent to then Chief of Staff for Donald Trump, Mark Meadows. And this was, like I said earlier at the beginning of the program, crazy conspiracy stuff about how, you know, the Biden group was they were rounding up the Biden team and they were putting them on barges off of Gitmo and to try them for sedition. And you know, the big lie, of course, that the election was stolen. And Ginny Thomas, the wife of Clarence Thomas, actually attended the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th, but apparently she says she didn't go to the Capitol. I heard some breaking news that the January 6th Commission is actually going to subpoena her, or I don't know if it's through an actual subpoena, but is actually one way or the other, is going to ask her to testify to the committee. They made that decision today, so that should be interesting. There are a couple facts about this that I think haven't been reported enough. One, when this story first broke, I heard a lot of people saying that Clarence Thomas should have recused himself and there was even an appearance of bias in this case where he was the lone dissenter. It was like an 8-1 decision saying that Trump couldn't stop couldn't stop the National Archives from turning over a whole bunch of executive branch material to the January 6th Commission. And people reporting that were claiming that these text messages from Ginny Thomas to Mark Meadows were turned over as part of that, but that's not true. These text messages were turned over voluntarily by Mark Meadows, so they weren't part of that Supreme Court case. And then the second thing, and you'll hear that in the follow-up question here that John Dickerson asks Adam Kinzinger, who's one of the 2 Republicans on the January 6th Commission, along with Representative Liz Cheney, but points out that although Mark Meadows voluntarily turned over these text messages, they stop in November. They don't cover December and January, all the way up to January 6th, which it kind of strains credulity that she would have stopped texting him then. Based on what she texted him up till then. And Mark Meadows has stopped cooperating and should be prosecuted by the Justice Department, but they still haven't started the contempt prosecution, so that's kind of bogus. There may be one other thing I want to talk about after we watch Adam Kinzinger's answer to John Dickerson asking him questions about this over here.
What is wrong with, you said the Supreme Court has its own ethics, so we'll let them handle that. Why can't a private citizen send texts, as zany as they may be, to the White House Chief of Staff? What's wrong with that?
Well, again, we're in a position where we're not confirming or denying, what's been reported by Costa and Woodward. But if they're, look, in any case, if a private citizen has a conversation, of course, we have a freedom of speech in this country. The question for the committee is this or any exchange. Was there a conspiracy or an attempt to come up with a reason, or how close did we get to overturn an election? Look, we are not, as the committee, out to to throw people in jail. We can have criminal referrals like we do against Mark Meadows because he has denied legitimate requests from Congress to come in repeatedly. So that's in DOJ. Our job is just to get answers from the American people, and then they can decide.
Before these texts drop off, they go away in December and January, given the passion with which Mrs. Thomas was texting, are you confident that Meadows has handed over all of his texts?
I'm not confident that Meadows has handed over everything at all. I mean, he was cooperating with us for a little bit, and then in an attempt to make Donald Trump happy, he stopped cooperating. We gave him plenty of space to come back, to resume that. He has not, and in fact, he's waived executive privilege, 1,000 times by presenting us what he already has. So no, I'm not convinced he's handed over everything to us, and that's why it's in the DOJ's hands now. Whether to prosecute him for contempt. He has contempt not just for Congress, for his old institution of Congress, and thereby for the American people. I hope DOJ does the right thing, and I hope we get all the information that it's not Congress, that the American people deserve, John. The American people deserve these answers.
All right, Congressman Kinzinger.
So you can see that answer there, and it does make clear the 2 points I was making before I showed the clip about how these texts were voluntarily turned over by Mark Meadows. They were not part of that National Archives case where Justice Thomas was the lone dissenter. I saw in the live comments along the way someone was asking me, Caged was asking, will Clarence Thomas face ethics charges? And I guess what Adam Kinzinger talked about before that clip, and you can see the entire interview at a link down in the video description under sources for CBS News Face the Nation, where they have the entire program split into segments, including the entire Adam Kinzinger interview. But the thing is, the Supreme Court, even the ethics requirements for other judges don't apply to Supreme Court justices. They're the completely their own arbiters of when to recuse themselves. No one oversees that, and there is some talk of legislation in Congress, and that's what Adam Kinzinger talked about earlier in that interview, that would require certain ethical standards for Supreme Court justices. But as of right now, there is no ethical oversight of Supreme Court justices at all, except for the impeachment power. But you have to get 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to impeach a justice of the Supreme Court. So that's even worse than a president. But anyway, I do want to thank all of you who showed up for the live show. I especially want to thank the people who support my program financially, since I often don't make a lot of ad revenue from these live streams, even though they take me like 8 or 10 hours of preparation. So thank you. I can never pronounce your name, Joris. Thank you for using your sticker showing you've been a member of my channel for 9 months. You can become a channel member by clicking on the join button under the video, although I can't give out rewards like the copies of the U.S. Constitution and the weatherproof vinyl #LiberalViewer sticker. I can't give those out to YouTube members because I have no way to get messages with your shipping address. But if you want those type of rewards, you can become a patron on Patreon at the link down right under the video, and just for as little as $5 a month you can get those rewards, or you can do a one-time direct donation through PayPal. And I also appreciate those Super Chat contributions. Matthew, before the show even started, Kettle, and then a couple from Lulu Girl. So, and the second one is for the cat collar cam, which don't have a cat collar cam this week, but I do have a final dash clip that I'm going to end the show with. I have to finish up because I have a meeting at 5. This is my every other week meeting, or I think it's going to be every week next month. So to plan this district attorney candidate debate that's happening April 30th here in Sacramento. But the dash clip I have is from yesterday afternoon. I caught a clip showing why one of the things we refer to my cat Dash as conversation boy, and that's because not always, but a lot of the time, if you mew at him, he will mew back, and it pretty much can go on indefinitely. Here's a brief clip in which I demonstrate Dash as conversation boy over here. So there you go. That's the Dash clip to finish the show. I only have 4 minutes to transition to my meeting here. So thank you all for joining me. I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put into this Monday media mix-up. I will be back next Monday and every Monday at least through the November midterm elections. And until next Monday, or until I have some reason to upload some other kind of video during the week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.